night the bet was made, the men were laughing so hard they could barely hold their glasses. It was 1854. The candles burned low in a dining room built on stolen labor, in a house that stood tall over acres of cotton fields. Outside, the air was thick and heavy, the kind of southern heat that clings to your skin even after sunset. Inside, a group of wealthy plantation owners sat around a long wooden table, drunk on bourbon and arrogance. And before the sun rose again, one reckless promise would change every life on that plantation. They said he married her as a joke. They said it was a bet. They said it would prove a point. But what happened next shocked the entire South. Before we go any further, if you're drawn to dark, forgotten history and stories that feel too strange to be real, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Night Archive. It helps this channel grow, and it tells me you want more stories history tried to bury. Now, let's step back into 1854. His name was Thomas Whitmore, 37 years old, broad shoulders, clean-shaven, the kind of man who believed the world was arranged exactly as it should be, with him standing on top of it. His plantation sat just outside Savannah, Georgia. White columns in the front, wide porch, fields stretching so far you couldn't see the edge of them. Over 100 enslaved people worked his land. To Thomas, they were numbers in a ledger, property, assets. Among them was a woman named Clara. Clara worked in the main house kitchen. She was in her early 30s, though hard labor made her seem older. She was large-framed, strong, with steady hands and quiet eyes that missed nothing. The other enslaved women trusted her. The men respected her. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Thomas barely noticed her at first. That night, the whiskey flowed freely. 4 other plantation owners had joined him for dinner. Politics, cotton prices, complaints about abolitionists in the North, the usual. Then the conversation shifted. One of the men, red-faced and loud, joked about how abolitionists claimed enslaved people were just as human. He laughed at the idea. Another man added that some northern newspapers had started printing stories about cruel masters, urging sympathy. Thomas leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink. They'd faint, he said, if they saw how ridiculous that thinking is. The red-faced man smirked. How ridiculous? Thomas's pride flared. Ridiculous enough that I could marry one of them tomorrow and nothing would change. The table went silent. Then laughter exploded. Marry one? Someone choked out. Thomas shrugged. It would prove the point. Bloodlines, status, power, none of that changes. A piece of paper doesn't rewrite nature. Another man leaned forward. You wouldn't. Thomas's jaw tightened. I would. A long pause. Then the challenge came. Do it, the red-faced man said. Marry one of your slaves, legally, in front of witnesses. If you're so certain, it won't change a thing. The bet was made in seconds. Money was placed on the table, not a small sum either, enough to buy several human beings outright. They laughed as they shook hands, as if they'd just agreed on a horse race. But Thomas had no idea what he had just set into motion. The next morning, the entire plantation buzzed with whispers. Clara was called into the main house. She walked in with flour still dusting her hands from kneading bread. She stood straight, eyes lowered but alert. Thomas told her plainly. "You're to be married," he said. She did not react. To me, a flicker crossed her face. Not shock, not fear, something else. Calculation. She asked only one question. "Will it be legal?" The room went still. Thomas blinked. "Of course," she nodded slowly. What no one in that room understood, not Thomas, not his overseer, not the men who had made the bet, was that in 1854, marriage law was complicated, dangerous, especially across racial lines. In Georgia, laws against interracial marriage existed, strict ones, but enforcement depended on visibility, on who challenged it, on how it was framed. Thomas believed his status could override anything. Clara understood something deeper. A legal marriage meant documentation. Documentation meant recognition. Recognition meant rights, even if small, even if fragile, even if dangerous. The ceremony was arranged quickly, quietly, held on the plantation grounds with a local preacher who owed Thomas money and kept his mouth shut. A few white witnesses attended, half amused, half scandalized. The enslaved community watched from a distance, silent. When the preacher asked Clara if she took Thomas as her husband, she answered clearly, "I do." Her voice did not shake. Thomas smirked through the vows. He expected humiliation. He expected whispers. He expected northern outrage, maybe. He did not expect consequences. Within weeks, rumors spread beyond the plantation. A wealthy white owner marrying an enslaved cook. Even in the South, that crossed lines people pretended did not exist. Other plantation owners distanced themselves. Invitations stopped coming. Business partners hesitated. But the real shift happened inside the house. As a legal wife, even one born enslaved, Clara occupied a position that blurred boundaries. She could not be sold without legal complication. She could not be whipped publicly without raising questions. She could sit at the dining table if Thomas allowed it. And one night, just to prove a point, he did. The silence at that table was heavier than any insult. Clara did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply sat straight and ate slowly. The enslaved workers noticed something else. Thomas's temper began to change. At first, he barked orders as usual. But when he struck a young boy in the yard one afternoon, Clara stepped onto the porch. "Thomas," she said calmly, just his name. In front of everyone, he froze. No one had ever addressed him that way. Something shifted in his expression. Not kindness, not love, but awareness. A legal tie changes power in ways pride cannot predict. Over the next months, Clara learned every ledger in the house, every debt, every shipment, every name. She asked questions in private, calm questions about profits, about losses, about rising abolitionist pressure. Thomas found himself answering, not because he respected her, but because he had to admit she understood numbers better than some of the men he trusted. In the enslaved quarters, hope flickered cautiously. Clara began negotiating small changes, longer rest breaks during peak heat, slightly better food rations, fewer night punishments, nothing dramatic, nothing that would ignite revolt, just steady, careful shifts. The other plantation owners watched from a distance. They had expected humiliation. Instead, they saw influence. By winter, Thomas realized something unsettling. He was no longer the only voice in his own house. Clara never raised hers. She didn't need to. One evening, months after the bet, Thomas attended a gathering in town. The same red-faced man who had dared him to marry stood across the room. "You still think nothing changed?" the man asked. Thomas hesitated. Across the plantation miles away, Clara sat at a desk with candlelight reflecting in her steady eyes, reviewing the books of a system built to crush her. She understood something the men never had. The bet had given her a doorway, and she had walked through it. Over the next 2 years, small legal papers were filed quietly. Transfers, adjustments, technicalities in ownership, percentages that Thomas barely read before signing. He trusted her with documents. He believed she was helping him protect his wealth. In truth, she was protecting something else. By 1857, several enslaved families had been quietly reclassified under conditional agreements that made selling them legally complex without her consent. A few were even freed under obscure clauses Thomas didn't fully grasp. He signed because he was distracted, because cotton prices fluctuated, because politics consumed him, because he underestimated her. The South whispered louder now. Some called Thomas weak, some called him reckless, some called Clara manipulative. None of them understood the full picture. In 1858, illness swept through the region. Fever, harsh and sudden. Thomas fell sick. For days he drifted in and out of consciousness. Clara stayed beside him, not out of romance, out of strategy. When he recovered, thinner and shaken, something in him had softened. Mortality changes men who thought they were untouchable. In 1860, as the country edged toward war, Thomas signed one final set of documents, transferring partial control of the plantation to Clara under spousal protections. He thought it would secure his legacy. He didn't realize it secured hers. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, chaos followed. Supply lines fractured. Wealth evaporated. Confederate currency collapsed. Plantations that once seemed invincible crumbled under debt. But Clara had prepared. When Union forces moved through Georgia years later, legal documents mattered. Ownership structures mattered. And by then, several dozen people once enslaved under Whitmore Plantation were legally free or protected under clauses Clara had arranged long before war began. Thomas died in 1864 from lingering illness. There was no grand speech, no redemption scene, just a quiet burial under a tree that once symbolized power. Clara stood at a distance. By 1865, emancipation became law across the South. But on that plantation, freedom had started years earlier. Because of a bet, because of arrogance, because one woman understood paperwork better than pride. Clara never left the land immediately. She stayed to stabilize it. Formerly enslaved families worked the fields. As paid laborers under contracts, she negotiated carefully. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about that era was, but it was different. And in 1870, records show Whitmore Plantation listed under the name Clara Whitmore. A name once spoken only in kitchens, now printed in ink. The South had laughed when the bet was made. They stopped laughing when they saw the outcome. Not because a man married an enslaved woman, but because the woman changed the system from inside it. If this story surprised you, if it made you rethink how power can shift in unexpected ways, let me know in the comments. Do you think Thomas ever realized what he had truly set in motion? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard and remembered, share this video so more people can discover Night Archive. History isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves quietly through signatures, through strategy, through patience. And sometimes it begins with a bet no one thought would matter.